Good morning, everyone. My name is Nania Campbell, and I am a research associate here at the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, and the executive director of the Bill Anderson Fund. And thank you for joining us this morning for this plenary session. We are going to be talking about future possibilities for the hazards and disaster field. So to give you a sense of how this session is going to go, we're going to do a quick overview. So in recognition that we are navigating a time of tremendous uncertainty and dismaying threats to the progress we've made in the hazards and disaster field over the past several decades, this session is going to help us collectively imagine some future possibilities for our community. By daring to critically evaluate where we are today and to articulate what we want for tomorrow, we are committing ourselves to building, planning, and willing that future into being. So as part of that process, our panel will be doing that by answering a few questions. You've seen the first one before, and that is, what is your vision for the hazards and disaster field over the next 50 years? And then they're also going to be answering a question of what are some specific steps that we need to take to begin moving in that direction. Now, I'm going to first model that process by providing an example involving the inspiration for our session, and then I'll call up each of our speakers who will go through their vision for the future of our field and specifically the steps that it will take to get there. It will then be your turn to share your visions for the future of the field. And for those of you who have not already done so, we will give you some time to respond to the prompt that you received in an email on Friday. And then we'll do a brief 2-minute share activity. So look around you, you're gonna find a partner in the audience. And so you'll share your vision with that partner very concisely. And for the remainder of our time, it will be dedicated to sharing out your visions with the rest of us so that we can collectively start to think about the future together. I want to encourage you, when you're thinking about your vision for the next 50 years of this field, to think about what is possible and what should be, not just what's wrong today. The speakers leading us through the visioning process today are 4 alumni and 1 current fellow of the William Averett Anderson Fund. And I'm going to share a little bit more about this organization in a moment. But first, especially since 54% of you are new first-timers at the Natural Hazards Workshop, I want to make sure that I explain a little bit about who Bill Anderson was and how his legacy brought us to this moment. The late William Averett Anderson was a member of the first cohort of graduate students at the Disaster Research Center. And over the course of a distinguished career, he became a thought leader who had a tremendous impact on the development of the hazards and disaster field. Throughout his career, it's a little trigger happy, this thing. Throughout his career, Bill demonstrated both thoughtful scholarship and big picture thinking about the larger research community. And at the National Science Foundation, for example, Bill played a key role in fostering interdisciplinary and cross-national research, recognizing the necessity of bringing in diverse perspectives for building a scientific enterprise that was capable of addressing the complex underlying causes of disasters within the United States and abroad. Bill was also passionate about mentorship, and he spent countless hours across his career both personally guiding emerging scholars and professionals and building an infrastructure within the institutions of science in this country to systematically support them. His expressions of deep concern about the graying of the field ultimately led to the National Science Foundation's initiatives focused on enabling the next generation of disaster research, which propelled forward ambitious emerging scholars at the time toward becoming many of the current leaders of the field today. Bill also challenged the disaster research community to examine understudied issues and populations that experience disproportionate harm and suffering from disasters, and to bring more of these individuals into the field, not simply as an act of fairness, but as a necessary mechanism for strengthening the research enterprise, attending to its blind spots, broadening its frames of reference, and deepening its understanding of the human-driven systems that help to produce, amplify, and potentially attenuate risk. Bill recognized that diversity and inclusion were critical to the ongoing advancement of disaster science and management because Bill was a visionary who intentionally forged a path toward the future that needed to be realized. After Bill's untimely passing in 2013, his wife, Norma Anderson, founded the Bill Anderson Fund to pick up where he left off and pass the baton to the next generation who could continue building that future that Bill had envisioned. Like Bill, Norma Anderson is not one to simply breathe a wish into the world and hope for it to take root. Norma understood that for a vision to become reality, this organization would need a model and a plan and to take the necessary steps to bring that vision to fruition. And the steps that the BAF, that would be taken to make this happen included, first, establishing the Bill Anderson Fund as a national nonprofit organization, which included articulating a clear vision, which has always been the North Star of the Bill Anderson Fund, of a disaster workforce that is reflective of American society. And given the breadth of this vision, the organization also needed a specific mission to scope and guide its work. And that mission was to expand the number of underrepresented professionals in hazards and disaster research and practice. Establishing the Bill Anderson Fund also required the support of this community, which Norma obtained by bringing out Bill's Rolodex and inviting many of you to join a growing cadre of mentors, supporters, and advisors. Step 2 was to build a community of graduate students with great potential to become future leaders. The Bill Anderson Fund has always sought to lead a broader transformation in our field that could only take place through intentionally cultivating its future leaders, just as Bill did throughout his career. Thus, the Bill Anderson Fund's primary focus was and is to support a successful graduate school experience among underrepresented groups that often struggle to obtain the support that they need to reach their career aspirations. The BAF uplifts those talented and passionate students who share a core concern for marginalized communities to help them become future leaders who will challenge current practices, introduce new perspectives, and strengthen the foundation that Bill and other visionary leaders had so carefully laid for them. They also serve as role models to each other and to those coming behind them to build safe spaces to explore ideas and provide validation for new perspectives. Creating that future that we want to see requires a thoughtful connection, an intentional through line between past and present, much as we saw with the presentations this morning on the first, second, and third assessments. The third step is to develop and uphold a common research ethos and set of values. And the Bill Anderson Fund Fellows have built their professional identities by expanding on the work of scholars who've challenged this community to shine a light on the human toll of disasters, the policy and practices that tend to reproduce harm, and the perspectives that are often overlooked and ignored. And you'll see those core concerns and values reflected in the remarks of our speakers, who highlight the importance of connections to community and an unflinching commitment to justice, which requires attention to those who are marginalized. Today, the Bill Anderson Fund has trained more than 100 students, boasting currently 46 current fellows and 67 alumni. And graduates, as these graduates that are advancing in their careers, they are having an impact on the hazards and disaster field. They are bringing those new perspectives to research, policy, and practice. And just in a moment, a few of them are going to be drawing on Bill's thoughtful combination of inspiration and strategy to relay their own visions for the future of the hazards and disaster field in the next 50 years. First up, we have Dr. Hans-Louis Charles, who was a founding fellow of the Bill Anderson Fund and the inaugural chairman of the Student Council from 2014 to 2015. He recently served as the chair of the BAF Alumni Network, and in 2024, he served on the Fund's board of directors. And he has served on the board of directors since 2014. Hans is an associate professor in the Homeland Security and Emergency Management program at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. And he is a disaster scientist, an alum of the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware, who conducts applied and theoretical research focused on emerging threats, community resilience, and collective behavior during disaster events, with for better informed policy and practice in the field of emergency management. Hans.
Does it go straight to the next? Okay. All right, I'm gonna put my timer on because I got in trouble during practice. And I wanna be respectful of my colleagues here. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to Nania, our fearless leader, and Norma Anderson, Lori, Kathleen, all those who've been here from the beginning. So today I wanna speak specifically about the field of emergency management, whether that's instruction, research, or practice. So in 50 years, this is our prompt, right? I envision that the profession of emergency management in the United States of America functions from a humanitarian ethos and not just a state security framework. And when we're talking about emergency management here, we mean all levels of government, federal, state, and local, who are tasked with creating the framework in which communities reduce vulnerability to hazards and cope with disasters. So for many of you, this may seem like a no-brainer, which is great. That means that we're on the same page. If not, that's okay. We can discuss it later at the barbecue, all right? So there's a difference here with a distinction that I just want to draw upon. Humanitarian ethos is a set of beliefs and values that prioritize the alleviation of suffering and the promotion of human welfare. It's a moral framework that guides humanitarian action, emphasizing principles like humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. The state security framework is a comprehensive structure of policies, procedures, and mechanisms a government uses to protect, and in this sequence, its sovereignty, territory, critical infrastructure, and citizens from internal and external threats. It is designed to ensure government stability, safety, and ability to function effectively. And I argue that this is the cage that stifles emergency management's progression, right? So, quick example of these two, all right? In 2010, everybody remembers the Haiti earthquake that occurred. Well, the United States government and the public showed unprecedented solidarity, providing relief to the people in Haiti, right? Sending relief efforts through military and nonprofit organizations. That's from a humanitarian ethos. Now, the same population from a state security framework will view these individuals as a threat to state security. And not only as a threat, but also not worthy of human dignity in that process. So we're dealing with the same population from two different perspectives that leads to two different outcomes. So here are the 3 steps to implement to get to my vision. First step, we need to separate emergency management from homeland security. All right, please. All right? Both literally and conceptually, all right? We need to revamp the all hazards approach, and we need to center the everyday work of community-based organizations, NGOs, and volunteer groups. So I hope to get through all 3 points. Please don't get mad if I go a little long. All right, number 1. So the profession of emergency management must be decoupled from homeland security, all right? Of course, this challenges the dominant paradigm, the civil defense origins of the field, and the likely continuation of that for the foreseeable future. However, if we are honest, we will see that the relationship between Homeland Security and FEMA is a toxic relationship. That's the best way I can frame it. So not only is separation needed, annulment is needed, complete annulment. And this relationship I compared to that of Princess Peach and King Bowser. For those who are familiar with the Mario Brothers, Princess Peach and the Mushroom Kingdom were doing fine. They had issues, but they were doing fine before Bowser showed up. Nobody asked him to show up and mess up everything. At the state government level, we see partisan politics really dictating the priorities of how funding is deviated. And now with the funding being uncertain, we have a lot of things to consider, right? Who will pick up that gap? At the local level, we see significant capacity and capability gaps. Much of this has to do with how emergency management is conducted. Again, through the state security paradigm, they're focused on the continuation of government, restoration of critical infrastructure. Those are the main priorities of emergency management. Individual and household preparedness and recovery is a personal responsibility in the United States of America because of this framework. 2, let's revisit the all hazards approach, which is the holy of holies of emergency management. I'm not even allowed to talk about this, but it needs to be updated. All right, this is a comprehensive approach emergency preparedness uses to prepare for all hazards, quote unquote, a full spectrum of possibilities, but focusing on the capabilities and capacities of the government, right? Now, if we're honest and we look at, let's say, the response to COVID-19, we see that there are clear gaps in what we are prepared for. So I'm proposing let's do a revamped all hazard approach with a plus. So disasters are really considered social disruptions. How about we also address everyday human condition and suffering that exists in our community? All right. I'm reclaiming my time from these claps, okay? Don't give me that. All right. All right, and again, all hazards approach looks at the full life cycle of the disaster. So you're looking at preparedness, mitigation, etc. Well, let's also mitigate poverty. How about we mitigate health disparities? Because we know what disasters do to those that are poor and those that have compromised immunity, right? So let's address that. So this approach is really about efficiency. But let's consider effectiveness and impartiality, all right? Step 3, let's elevate the everyday unseen good work that occurs in our community. Let's elevate it. Let's center the contributions of these CBOs, NGOs, volunteer groups, religious affiliated charity groups. Why? Because they actually do the good work. They actually address the vulnerabilities in the community. And when the disaster occurs, they have a disproportionate role in solving the recovery efforts. So they have the largest role in the longest phase of the disaster life cycle, but get the least funding and support. So let's flip that, all right? So, and this will then give the profession greater legitimacy in the community. So when a proposal is made to cut emergency management or FEMA, there will be some sort of protest or uproar about it, because it's seen as an entity worth saving, right? So we need to redirect mission goals, funding, and priorities. And those in academia, we need to center this work within our curriculum and our programs. This means changing what we discuss as the most important aspects of the disaster life cycle. Often we focus on volunteer groups as one module, 1 week, a brief discussion. This should be the center of our discussion here. So, upgrading emergency management in the US, let's think big beyond continuity of operations or critical infrastructure protection. You know, how can FEMA benefit from the expertise of USAID? The good parts, all right? A future emergency management should prepare for all hazards, but also elevate everyday vulnerabilities, all right? And also, alleviate everyday vulnerabilities and elevate human dignity within the community as a central goal, and harness domestic humanitarianism. I want to stop there for the sake of time, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. All right. So next up, we have current fellow As you see, we skipped a few slides. Current fellow, Carlo Chongo Pizarro. He is a current BAF fellow who has been with us since 2021. He's a first-generation PhD candidate in the urban and environmental planning policy, and in urban and environmental planning and policy at University of California, Irvine, and his research examines how immigration policy and disaster management intersect with a focus on undocumented communities and sanctuary policy. Come on up, Carlo.
Okay. Before we begin, I want to give a big shout out to all the students here. If I can do this, y'all can too someday, so like no pressure. Okay. So I want to use my time today to talk about what disaster justice demands from us when we step outside the walls of the university. And for me, that starts with one of the most important yet uncomfortable questions in disaster research, that the same question that the late Dr. Quarantelli asked us decades ago. What is a disaster? For too long, the answer to that question has been shaped by official declarations, hazard maps, and policymaking. But when you organize with marginalized communities or undocumented communities like I do, you realize that disasters don't always come in the form of hurricanes or wildfires. Disasters can be made by policy. It can happen every day, go unrecognized, simply because of who defines them. There's a saying you probably heard before: if the tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make it sound. And I want to flip that for this room. If borders didn't exist, if immigration wasn't criminalized, would crossing an invisible line still be considered wrong? The answer depends entirely on who gets to define harm. And right now, those definitions exclude the realities undocumented people live through, realities where deportation, raids, and detention are disasters. The first action I want to leave you with is this: we must continue to ask and challenge what we define as a disaster, because when we allowed only wildfires, floods, earthquakes to count, we ignored the daily disasters caused by systemic violence like deportation rates, detention without due process, or the quiet disappearance of our community members. If we don't name these harms as disasters, we won't prepare for them, we certainly won't prevent them, and we certainly won't protect the people most affected by them. For my second point of action, disaster justice requires that we move beyond research confined in the university walls. This means translating our knowledge into tools that communicate, that can be used and that they want to use. Research is not neutral, and when it's inaccessible, communities can see it as useless. However, when it's shared with intention, it becomes a resource for action, resistance, and protection. And I want to share one example from my own work with the community. I helped create a map using data obtained through a public records request by the Orange County Rapid Response Network. And this data documented the exact locations of immigration and customs enforcement apprehensions, what many in the communities and advocates are rightfully calling kidnappings, across Santa Ana, Anaheim, and Garden Grove, California. What made this data especially alarming is that many of these kidnappings happened without clear warrants, legal representation, or notifications to family members, violating basic principles of due process. And on the map, the darker shades of purple show higher concentrations of these enforcement actions labeled alongside the name of Anaheim neighborhoods. The pattern reveals that where immigration enforcement is most likely to appear, often near homes, workplaces, and school and immigrant communities. This map wasn't created for a journal article. It was made for the deportation defense groups I organized with, and it sparked action. And the neighborhoods most impacted, residents began to hold Know Your Rights trainings, forming community patrols, and establishing rapid response teams. They turned fear into collective action. They created protection, not in theory, but in practice. And to me, that's what research beyond the university can look like. That's what it means to stop treating knowledge as something we own and start treating it as something we share for survival. Finally, for my third action, is a challenge to policymakers and researchers in this room. We need to institutionalize community accountability and disaster research and planning. That means historically excluded groups must not just be included, but they must be centered from the very beginning. Inclusion isn't just showing up with the survey after the plan is already made, it's co-designing that plan with the people most affected. It means advisory boards where system-impacted voices aren't symbolic, they're decisive. And I witnessed the consequences of exclusion during a research project in which our team analyzed the air quality risks faced by undocumented and indigenous farm workers laboring through wildfire evacuations in Sonoma County. In this public board meetings, we requested to present our findings at the County Board of Supervisors, but we were denied time on the agenda and told we could only speak during the open forum, with a limit of just 1 minute per person. During the public forum, undocumented farm workers courageously shared their experiences of working in the thick smoke, suffering long-term health effects, and being forced to risk their lives to keep their jobs. But after they spoke, some members of the public began shouting racist slurs against Black folks and immigrants, and instead of defending those testifying or holding the perpetrators accountable, the board chose to shut down the public comments altogether. Then, after the silence in the room, they said the board wanted to hear from the experts. And I want to emphasize this, that the people who lived through and worked during the destructive fires while laboring are the experts. Us who supported them in documenting those risks are also experts too. So the issue wasn't expertise, as the board claimed. It was straight up refusal. Refusal to recognize that knowledge doesn't only exist in institutions, but exists in the bodies and breath of those forced to endure the risk without protection. That's why we must redefine success, not by how many policies get passed down or how resilient a jurisdiction claims to be, but how much dignity, protection, and justice are actually delivered to the people most at risk. Because with kind of accountability, disaster justice isn't justice, it's just a performance. Ooh, and then my last slide. So I want to leave you all with this. My vision for the next 50 years in disaster research, that is a combination of theory, research practice, and personal lived experience. In the next 50 years, I envision disaster research that no longer begins and ends within the universities, but starts with and stays accountable to the people most harmed by systemic neglect. I envision a future where crossing a border isn't criminalized and where disaster planning protects us all regardless of citizenship status. And lastly, I envision a world where we stop asking how vulnerable people are and start dismantling the system making them vulnerable in the first place. Thank you.
I told you this was going to be a good one. Next up, we have Dr. Maggie Leon Corwin, who was a BAF Fellow from 2019 until 2022. More recently, she served as Communications Director of the BAF Alumni Network in 2024. And Maggie is a research scientist at the Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis at the University of Oklahoma. She's an interdisciplinary scholar and a sociologist whose research examines the intersections of environmental justice, disaster risk, and infrastructure resilience. Her work explores how environmental risks marginalize incarcerated populations, disaster-affected persons, and energy development. Maggie, you want to come up?
Thank you, Nadia. Okay, so I want to start by admitting that when I first received the invitation to share my vision for Field 50 years from now, I really struggled. I couldn't really get out of, I had a hard time finding myself in a place where I could imagine what possibilities the future might hold, because the weight of the reality of now was really creeping in on my ability to envision something better. But with great encouragement from my dear friend and colleague, Carlo, I was reminded to think back to what originally excited me about our field and this space. And that's really the tenacity with which scholars have engaged in research, great research, in really tough times. Yesterday morning, we heard about various disasters as turning points, and during the discussion, Kathleen Tierney said something to the effect of, we must hope, we must coordinate, and we must collaborate now more than ever. And I pulled that into my presentation here today because it really speaks to not only my vision, but I think a through line that we're all seeing throughout these sessions. My vision is ambitious, but simple. And that is, I envision a just, durable, and disaster-resilient future. This is a future where our systems and communities aren't just reactive to hazards. They are built to truly anticipate, respond to, and recover from disasters better than baseline. As we've heard already a few times throughout this workshop, disasters are not discrete events. They are stress tests on our social, political, and environmental systems. And too often, the disaster experience isn't shaped by any sort of inherent resilience or internal resolution, but by inequity, and more recently, shifting institutional and political priorities. 50 years from now, I envision a future where resilience and a just recovery are not reserved for a privileged few, but extend to every community, especially those we've historically left behind. I see co-design as the vehicle for advancing this vision. Co-design is a design approach where all interested persons are actively involved throughout the development or design process, or rather, and this is a little meta, as was collaboratively defined with community members and technical experts at a workshop I developed last fall. Co-design is a collaborative, cooperative, and interdisciplinary process that involves stakeholders working toward creative solutions to challenges that shape the best possible outcomes for all. I know that that's a really lofty definition, but I think it really speaks to what I'm hearing a lot of us circle around. And by embedding co-design practices into our field and practice, I believe we can cultivate practice that is durable enough to weather political and social maelstroms while keeping equity at the core of our work. A lot of this means leaning into what we already strive to do, and in a lot of cases do well, such as developing robust and long-lasting interdisciplinary collaborations across fields of practice and with communities. This will allow us to develop a shared language and understanding of a rapidly evolving hazardscape. And this is important because, as many of you, I think everyone in the room knows, communication can be either a barrier or a bridge to fruitful collaboration. This means not only shifting away from thinking of disasters as discrete, isolated events, as my colleagues have suggested, but it also means challenging ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones and work with folks from different sectors and communities on a regular basis. Without this intentional shift, we risk mismatched priorities, siloed responses, and communities rendered vulnerable. Second, we must also ground future disaster resilience efforts in the wisdom and needs of those most impacted. This means not just engaging communities we work with at various points in the process, but really treating them and working with them as valuable partners. They're not passive stakeholders, they're experts in their own survival. And the disasters we face today and the disasters we'll face in 50 years are too big, too complex, and too frequent to approach alone. We must collaborate in a way that centers community voices and leverages all forms of expertise. And third, central to the vision I have for our future field is one where we collectively embrace radical kindness as praxis. This approach is central to the co-design collaborations I envision for our future and reframes preparedness, response, and recovery as acts of collective care and empathy extended under the most challenging circumstances. This means holding ourselves accountable for engaging with philosophies and approaches like mutual aid, harm reduction, and abolition within the context of disasters, because there is no disaster-resilient future when we have an alligator Alcatraz in the Everglades during hurricane season. Radical kindness and care are especially needed in this context because disaster resilience planning is not just technical and rigorous, but it's also deeply human. Achieving a just and disaster-resilient future will require us to be as relentless as the disasters we face. It means forging a field of practice that sustains equity and resilience, even in the face of shifting political winds. As we move forward, let's commit to co-designing systems that aren't brittle but flexible, that don't leave people behind but bring everyone to the table, and that embodies not just preparedness but care. I want to close with a nod to the South, specifically Oklahoma, where, and this is truly crazy to me, I've lived and worked for almost 10 years. In Oklahoma, severe weather and disasters are seasonal. We have heavy ice storms, wildfires, and floods, and of course, tornadoes. Disasters like these have deeply shaped the culture in Oklahoma, but so have disasters like the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Across all of these contexts, Oklahomans, like many other communities in the aftermath of disasters, engage in exceptional behavior so inspiring that it prompted the phrase and statewide initiative dubbed the Oklahoma Standard. The Oklahoma Standard serves as a reminder that service, honor, and kindness, but really, people helping people, are what makes disaster resilience possible in the wake of tragedy. In the future, I envision the standard isn't the exception, but the rule. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspiration, Maggie. All right, and next up, here we go. Next up, we have Dr. Natasha Malman, who was a Bill Anderson Fund Fellow from 2016 until 2021. She is now an assistant professor in environmental health at Georgia State University School of Public Health. Her areas of research interest include public health system strengthening, governance and implementation of disaster recovery, community-based participatory research, school recovery after disasters, and maternal health and disaster issues. Come on up, Natasha.
Ooh, thank you, Nenia. So this is an image, if you can see it, of a person cradling a light bulb. So in the face of increasing frequencies and real complexities of natural hazards that lead to disasters, how can we craft policies that are restorative rather than just reactive, right? How do we reach out and protect the common good and the public good rather than just sacrifice it for short-term and really short-sighted private gain? So the goal of my work, and which also leads into my vision statement, is to identify and scale evidence-based leverage points in restorative policymaking, accelerating recovery by strengthening households, anchor institutions, and equity-denied places before the event occurs. So this is an image of a mother holding her daughter. The mother is delighted, the infant or the child is content and maybe even a little curious. So in creating these policies that restore rather than abandon, where do we begin, or where do we start with our focus? Well, let's start where resilience often begins, at the household, specifically with mothers. Mothers are really the source of resilience, and regressive social, economic, and health policies disproportionately burden working mothers, and it impacts the whole household. We must identify these leverage points for strategic interventions that shift the trajectories of mothers toward resilience, because resilient mothers lead to stable households and stronger communities, because when mothers thrive, the whole household thrives. This is an image of teenage students embracing each other, talking to each other at school, showing joy. The next focus that I'm asking you all to consider are institutions and the need to strengthen them as a source of resilience, particularly K-12 schools, as they serve as community anchors. We know schools are lifelines. When schools reopen quickly and children are able to return to their normal routine as quickly as possible, they are allowed to grieve and really forestall a lot of the adverse mental health outcomes that occur after a disaster. The faster these schools reopen, the faster communities can heal. Yet, when we overlay this policy web, we find that disasters hit vulnerable school districts hardest. These students are already facing housing and/or food insecurity and risk enduring deeper trauma after a disaster. So how do we support them? By assessing and investing in policies that retain teachers, provide mental health supports, and most importantly, demand that these spaces stay stable, apolitical, and protected centers of recovery. Lastly, I'm asking for a radical shift in how we view and integrate rural spaces. This image is of two older men sitting outside in front of an older home with a young boy. The older men are smiling warmly and gazing at the boy. The boy in turn is sitting near them and observing the older men. So rural spaces are often the first to signal systemic failure. They recover slower, they suffer more, and are left with fractured food, health, and economic systems. Their economies are also highly sensitive to weather-related hazards. They have higher shares of older populations, higher chronic disease prevalence, and proportionally, they have fewer hospital beds to treat their community members that are injured in major events. So we must meet them where decisions, planning, and most importantly, their budgets are decided and constrained with county commissioners. So what are my strategic calls to action? The first I believe we need to do is we need to deepen our evidence base through greater theoretical development. So for instance, what would it look like to marry communications with critical disability theory? Could we actually birth more receptive alerts and warnings that encompass access and functional needs? The second is, what would it look like to have a theoretical understanding of justice? What does that look like? And so these questions, I believe, are a worthy pursuit of this space. One of the emerging disciplines that I seek to marry in disaster studies is that of legal epidemiology. So here is an image from Temple University's Center for Law and Policy Research, which provides training as well as a way of highlighting research that focuses on this area. The second action is to practice cultural humility. It is a matter of acknowledging the spaces that we have left behind in the name of profit. This requires sustained community engagement where the power differential is acknowledged and checked. And one path forward that I am using is the book by Dr. Linda T. Smith called Decolonizing Methodologies, book image shown on screen. And my last strategic action item is really a focus on a greater focus on undergraduate education. I propose ensuring that undergraduate courses have greater touch points with communities, as well as community-defined assets and community-defined solutions. And most importantly, it's the use of art and literature developing just so that we can understand or that we can teach the undergraduates how to make meaning, how to use language. What would it look like to integrate Wendell Berry and bell hooks into the curriculum and defend the necessity of beauty and language, particularly when language is under attack? My suggested starting point is that of the parable of the sower and the sequel, parable of the talents. And lastly, this is an image of a girl. She is showing both joy and invitation. To end, I want to leave you not with my words, but the words of two greats that came before me that helped shape how I think, move, and really vision in this world. Recovery is not just a physical outcome, but a social process that encompasses decision-making about restoration and reconstruction activities. Dennis Moletti, Disasters by Design. And lastly, we can do something no other animal species has ever had the option to do. We can choose. We can go on building and destroying until we either destroy ourselves or destroy the ability of our world to sustain us, or we can make something more of ourselves. Octavia Butler, Parable of the Talents. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Marcus Hendricks, who is a founding fellow, was a doctoral student with the fund from 2014 to 2017. He is currently an associate professor of environmental planning and director of the Stormwater Infrastructure Resilience and Justice Lab at the University of Maryland. In 2023, Dr. Hendricks served as a senior advisor on environmental justice in the Biden-Harris administration's White House Council on Environmental Quality. And his research focuses on how social processes and development patterns contribute to hazardous built environments, vulnerable infrastructure, and associated risks, particularly in areas such as urban stormwater management, flooding, industrial hazards, and sanitary sewer overflows. Marcus.
Sheesh, what a tough lineup to follow. But Norma, this was the vision, right? This is the Bill Anderson Fund. And so really excited to be here and share sort of my vision with you all. And again, thanks so much to Nenia, Norma, Lori, for allowing us to do this. And so my vision is that over the next 50 years, we can eliminate the myth of natural disasters, advance systemic justice, and become a field that's inclusive and grounded, supporting communities to thrive daily and in crises. And so we eliminate this myth of natural disasters and remove it from our lexicon by first acknowledging and sharing the truths about the historic and ongoing systematic inequalities and call out the slow violence that leads to disasters. And so the big picture is that often, still to this day, folks see disasters as this unique, isolated phenomenon that are natural and beyond our control, as opposed to socially constructed events. But the reality is that whether it's lack of investment that leads to crumbling infrastructure, failing schools, or communities that are underserved yet over-policed, these are the everyday underpinnings of disaster. And if the first cartoon wasn't clear enough, no worries. I have a second one. This one, for example, illustrates the systematic ways in which the Black American experience has been sabotaged. From Jim Crow to redlining and subprime mortgages, these occurrences have individually and collectively impacted Black and other communities of color. Everyday ability to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from small-scale emergencies and larger-scale disasters alike. And so we can't talk disasters, past, present, or future, without acknowledging these everyday systemic circumstances that effectively set the stage. For example, as a response to climate change, this idea of living with water has surfaced. But the fact of the matter is that marginalized communities have been living underwater since their American inception. And not because any given group or individual is inherently vulnerable to risk or hazards. It's not like Black and brown folks are born with this rain cloud that hovers over our heads, although it does feel that way at times. It's because of the state and political violence that has played out over time through race and income-based policies and what I like to call the explicit version of SV to disasters, slow violence to disasters. As a part of this slow violence, the very stage that was set for Black and other marginalized communities, using flooding as an example, was based on water, usually too much. And the spaces that were set aside for us to live, work, and play were seen as undesirable places to live by our white counterparts due to the wet, flood-prone conditions. And I'm highlighting this history because I think in this moment we run the risk of losing this history and context. Ironically, in the era of big data and advanced modeling and mapping, we passively reduce this history and context to variables and indices, not to mention the burning and banning of records that tell these stories. And so whether we're talking racialized topographies or the banning of Black American history, as one of my and our late friends, colleagues, and mentors, Dr. Dennis Milletti and many others in this room have said, these are disasters by design. However, it's not just a matter of historical circumstance, but contemporary and future challenges. It's not just a matter of water quantity from a traditional flooding perspective, for example, but quality and what impacted folks are being exposed to during these flooding events. Lead has become a headline news story in recent years, but what about other pathogens and bacteria that are antibiotic resistant specifically, especially at a time when antibiotic resistant bacteria deaths are supposed to grow from around 700K now to upwards of 10 million by 2050, and we're finding antibiotic resistant pathogens in people's homes who have been impacted by flooding. And communities of color are already disproportionately impacted by these types of pathogens. The environmental movement of the 70s influenced our most consequential environmental policies today, and honestly, that movement as we know it or think we know it wasn't very inclusive. And don't get me wrong, the movement and the policies that resulted from this movement were transformative. In fact, I myself have an early edition of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson on my bookshelf. But these policies, by the time they made it across the finish line, the Clean Water Act, for example, weren't effectively designed to protect people. They were designed to protect the environment. And so we must acknowledge these legacies, past and present, and be intentional in rectifying and expanding for the future. And so how do we do this? Well, the next step is that we must institutionalize local, state, and federal level environmental justice policies to repair this harm and ensure a just future. I think we know now more than ever that we can't shy away from the politics, because as the saying goes, you may not do politics, but politics does you. And our very lives, work, and futures depend on politics. So we must engage in politics from the grassroots up. We must step outside our comfort zone and engage in policy making. In 2023, I had the honor of standing just left of the stage to witness President Biden sign just the second ever EO dedicated to environmental justice, and the most comprehensive EO for EJ to date. My team in office was charged with implementing this EO an earlier EO that President Biden signed in his first week. That included some things that you all might be familiar with, from the EJ scorecard to the climate and economic justice screening tool to Justice 40, policies that were designed to assess the government's progress on advancing EJ and target investment for disadvantaged communities. But these federal policies were just an example of what really could and needs to be implemented at all levels of government across our respective institutions. So I charge you all to take these policies, replicate them through your own institutions, because locally is where the real magic happens anyways. As I reflect and see some of my colleagues in the audience who worked in arm with me at the White House, my goodness, what a difference a day makes. Because if more of us don't continue to engage in politics and policy making, well, we as a discipline might end up as a 404 error page, figuratively and quite literally. John Cooper, one of my mentors, aka Coop Dog, always tells me that if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Well, I'm glad I had that one picture of Nina and Dante and I, because otherwise I would be having a real life episode of that TV show Severance, questioning whether it ever actually happened. And so the last thing I'll say is that something that my peers have said, we must foster true community partnerships that leads to community ownership. We can't be successful exclusively from the top. We have to build with the people on the ground. Black women specifically are the backbone and the best version of us. Black women are the reason why we're up here today. That's my way of saying a shout out to Nene and Norma. I'm gonna reclaim my time like Hans. But there's levels to how we build community. Ornstein and other folks have said that there's levels to it, and that, in fact, Ornstein differentiates between what she refers to as sort of empty rituals of participation, which often lack thoughtfulness and intentionality, and more meaningful participation that exemplifies real power and influence over outcomes. Even with modern approaches and methodologies, the goal has to be partnerships with delegated community power through community science and ultimately community control and ownership. As I close, I want to leave you all with this. The evacuation route from drowning in autocracy and tyranny is through the people in real democracy, with sharing the power, proper compensation, job opportunities, community credit, community partnership or participation has tremendous potential, because in the end, community participation is the most consequential pillar in disaster planning and is the democratic gateway to building more inclusive, resilient, and just communities. My last slide, I promise. I'll begin with my vision. I'll end with my premonition. Don't let this come true, folks. That our field might render itself obsolete if we don't once and for all view disasters not as isolated phenomenon or a set of variables or indices, but a part of ongoing everyday environmental injustice. And I don't think in this moment is the time to tone down or find alternate language, but normalize the language that tells the truth. I'm gonna repeat that last line really quick. That was a bar. ChatGPT could never. We have to normalize the language that tells the truth. Language that shouldn't be seen as radical or far left. This isn't the time to shrink. This is the time to stand tall, because shrinking is a short path to extinction. Thank you.
Well, I was going to ask for a round of applause for our panelists, but for all of our panelists, please, one more round of applause. And now, friends, it's time for you to share your vision. So I'm going to give you exactly 3 minutes. As you can tell, I'm a taskmaster up here. 3 minutes to share your vision using the form that was linked in this QR code and that was sent to you on Friday. Then after that, I will give you 2 minutes to share with the person next to you before we open it up for you to share out your visions with the rest of us. So your time starts now. Okay, your 3 minutes are up. Hopefully you've had a time to share your vision on the form. Now you will have 2 minutes to pair up with a partner in the audience and share your vision with them for 1 minute each. like 5 seconds. And your time is up. That went by pretty quickly, didn't it? Okay, now we're gonna wrap up the paired portion. Yes, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. I hope you just made a friend. A friend in vision? A friend in life? Okay, we're going to spend about the next 10 minutes or so having you all share your visions out. So if you would like to share your vision, I will give you 1 moment, 1 minute, 1 minute. Just raise your hand and we will bring a mic over to you. We've got some hands up in the front here. Yes, yes. So when you share out your vision, please say your name and your affiliation, and then your vision.
So Dave Schwartz of Rochester Institute of Technology, cybersecurity, information studies, data science, they're vital partners in this pathway to ensure the safety of everything.
Thank you. There you go.
There we are. Michaela Howells, Colorado State University. Building on what Dr. Melman pointed out, reproductive justice, I think, is the core of disaster recovery, especially for the next 50 years. It's all about who gets control over their own bodies, who gets control over their own finances, where they can live, what they can do. And if we're talking about mothers as being this cornerstone of resilience and this cornerstone of support, then we need to support everyone in their reproductive choices.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Batson from University at Albany and Bill Anderson Fund Fellow. So I wrote, the ambiguity of who an immigrant is should be corrected, and their actual challenges and experiences must be very profound in research. This would ensure better and well-tailored policies could be made for them. So that's what I'm looking out for.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Saida Sobaninia, Arizona State University. I was thinking strengthening and relying more than ever on social factors like social cohesion, as external helps like government helps are reducing in their assistance, in their timely assistance to communities. As Adam in the last panel said, the communities helped each other after a disaster. They fed each other, they sheltered each other. So all of those factors I see these days are really important to focus on.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nyla Howe. I am a PhD student at Rutgers University. And my vision is disaster preparedness programming, and disaster preparedness programming centered around marginalized knowledge systems. Disaster preparedness, as we know, has a traditional approach within the field of disaster management. And so I think incorporating and really centering disaster preparedness programming on the experiences and desires of the communities that we're working with is critical to moving forward.
So I think we want to come over here. We have some other volunteers who've been waiting.
I'm Amina Maselhi at Oregon State University, and I am taking an engineering approach, but I want to lead with radical kindness to creatively and collaboratively use community-driven research questions whenever we're doing our engineering approaches to dismantle both the current systems and then kind of really reimagine a disaster-resilient future.
Thank you.
Sara Belligoni, Puerto Rico Research Hub at the University of Central Florida. Well, 3 things. The first one is that as researcher, we have to go in the field. We got to stop doing our job from our office behind a desk and be there. And connected to that, number two, not working for the communities, with the communities. And that's key, because the communities know what they need, how their needs look like. We do not, even though if we are part of the community somehow. So that's key. And the third part is that we have to have this. We have to have people that endure what it means to be part of a minority, a first generation, or an international like me, and have this conversation, because we don't fear the speaking up part. And we have to make sure that we have spaces where we can let it out, be heard, and continue to do what we want, especially nowadays. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we have some hands over here.
Got the mic? Hi, I'm Casey Calloway. I'm with the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. And what I think the four of us right here all added and changed what we originally put because of this brilliant panel. So thank you so much for giving us more insight and enlightenment. For me, it's that we start focusing on mitigation and adaptation as priority and primary, and really we cannot wait 50 years to do that. But the other piece, and again, I want to reiterate what y'all have said on this panel, is so vitally important. We cannot keep having everybody start where they start. We have to get action, not fear the word equity. We have to get everybody leveled up to the same baseline so that all of our response time, that resilience in our communities is real and true and fair across all of our communities.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joshua McDuffie at Vanderbilt, Bill Anderson Fund Fellow. Actually, Maggie said something that really stood out to me, disasters being a stress test for our social systems. And I come from the perspective that the community does know best, and so giving them the resources to be able to deal with risk as they see it and use risk-informed decision-making to address the problems where they start, I think is really critical. And I love to see more and more people able to speak the language that we can need to do things better.
Thank you.
Hi, Jim Schwab, the allegedly retired urban planner. I didn't manage to get it onto this technology. It wasn't working for me, so I'm going to get it in the record now. I think, to me, the critical thing over the next 50 years, not just 50 years from now, but over that whole period, is that we learn how to involve all the critical voices, capture all the critical voices, involve all the critical voices in what we're doing. And when I say critical voices, I mean that from the standpoint of experience. What people, disaster is what people experience. It's not simply some technically defined term related to, technical terms in our various kinds of disciplines. If we learn to capture all that, then we can put the technology and all the technical knowledge in service of what we have learned, and that often will get us to answering the question of why are some of the most critically injured and affected people being affected in the way that they are. And so with that, I will close by saying I second the language that I captured in my shorthand from Marcus, that we need to normalize the language that tells the truth. So.
Thank you, Jim. Okay. And we have time for one more comment. Do we have a mic right over here? Okay.
Hey, y'all. My name is Alex Dorman. I work at the United Way of Greater Nashville, and I serve as the co-chair of the Nashville Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. What I would envision for the future is a vibrant multidisciplinary field that is leading the charge in demands for human rights, anti-militarism, decolonization, and promoting democracy, safe environments, human dignity, and creating community collaborations and community-based systems that serve as alternatives for the zombie capitalist system that is eating itself and ourselves and our future alive. And so I would hope to see this field as one of the areas that can push back really forcefully by meeting people where they are in the positions and the circumstances that we all find ourselves in, and start forging an alternative to profit-driven, exploitation-based capitalism, which highest form is fascism, which we are seeing growing in our country.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing those remarks, and to all of you for sharing out your visions. You can see that we are crossing a wide spectrum, speaking a lot of different truths from different perspectives and communities. I want to give one more round of applause to our panel. Of whom I am so proud, and thank you all for joining us today.
We can rest, we can eat.
A few quick announcements before the lunch. Before we break for lunch today, we have a few announcements, but first and foremost, can we please acknowledge what just happened here in terms of Marcus, Natasha, Maggie, Carlo, Hans. The seeds that you just planted in this room, you cannot know how they are going to grow and flourish. But trust us all, you planted the seeds. Thank you. And Nania Campbell, founding Bill Anderson Fund Fellow, Executive Director, leader and visionary. Thank you for leading this panel with your trademark grace and brilliance. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for listening and for your courage and compassion. Elise, thank you for capturing that and all that you've done for this workshop.